President Biden is tested positive.
I want to bring Yamiche Alcindor, who's on set with me now, rushing in. Thank you, Yamiche, as we're getting this breaking news. Peter, if you could stand by as well, because we do want to kind of keep you there for us as things are developing with this breaking news story. It's not necessarily surprising, right? COVID has been swirling around this president for quite some time. At one point, the vice president testing positive as well. He's had several contacts over the last few months who have, in fact, have tested positive. The president continuing to test negative. However, today now getting that positive test, as Peter said, 79 years of age. However, now taking Paxlovid. You think about also this schedule ahead, what he's doing right now, what he's trying to accomplish, and how this might actually kind of halt things for a moment as he deals with this COVID positive test.
I mean, there's so many things that this White House has been having to deal with and juggle. And now you have the leader of the United States, President Biden, testing positive for COVID. It is absolutely a wrench in the plans here. I will say that I've been talking to White House officials for months about this. They have been planning at the White House for the moment, the day when this happened. They do believe that he will have, they believe, at least when I talk to them, mild symptoms because they believe he's had his booster shot. He's been vaccinated. He's someone who really has tried to take this pandemic very, very seriously. He was elected on the idea that he was going to be the one who brought in the experienced team, who was going to be the president who could figure out this pandemic. And he has been the person who has made sure that vaccinations have gone out throughout the country, that Americans have continued to talk about the pandemic. But I think, Yasmin, it's also a reminder, right, that we are living in a pandemic. There are so many things that often become the things that are the top priorities, whether it's inflation or whether it's foreign policy in Ukraine or whether it's the January 6 hearings that are going to be historic tonight. All of those things are happening, but at the backdrop of that is this pandemic that is continuing to make Americans sick, that is continuing to kill Americans, and that has killed more than 1 million Americans. And there are so many Americans across the country that are mourning the loss of loved ones and are also having to deal with their own COVID diagnoses that I think it's a reminder for all of us, including the president, that this is still the thing that they wake up at every morning to think about at the White House. When I talk to them about all the other issues they're juggling, COVID never is not on that list, right? Yeah. This is a White House that understands still that it's looming, that is the thing that's on top of people's minds. And by the way, it's the thing that when voters wake up in the morning and they leave their homes, it's the thing that we're reminded about every day, right? You have to put on your mask or do something. Something has happened in your life that has changed because of COVID every single day. And this is, I think, a reminder of just how serious these times are.
Well, and if you didn't think COVID was still a threat right now with this Omicron variant of BA.5 that they say at some points are surpassing kind of the vaccinations and more people are getting sick multiple times often in 1 month. I have a friend who tested positive just a couple of weeks ago, tested positive once again. It is still very much a threat. And by the way, it does not discriminate. The president of the United States now, in fact, testing positive, despite the fact that he has done everything right, both testing and getting vaccinated as well. And if you're an American that did not think this was something to take seriously, you see the president once again having to now deal with a COVID diagnosis.
This virus does not discriminate. As you said, the president has it now. I also think it's a reminder that there are still people who have been the most impacted, and that is people of color and poor people who have not had at times the same resources to do the things like stay at home, like work remotely. You know, we throw around those terms that became, I think, the terms of this pandemic, the terms of this generation, social distancing. But I've talked to so many people who can't social distance, have to work. They're driving our buses. They're in our grocery stores. They're doing all of the sort of essential work that Americans maybe didn't think of as essential work, because we think of essential workers and we think of firefighters and doctors and all of those people who, of course, are incredibly important during these times. But we also think about the least among us, the people who keep this economy running. They have been impacted disproportionately by COVID. And then, of course, add to that the fact that now the president of the United States is having to deal with this. But the president's also talked about that a lot, right? And when you think about sort of the way that he's handled COVID, he's always talked about the fact that this is a virus that it doesn't matter your political party, even though it's become polarized. You can get this virus, you can get really sick. And I have to say, even with the vaccines and the boosters, we have to remind that there are people that are living with long COVID here, and that is very scary.
And we still don't necessarily know the effects of long COVID. And by the way, we're trying to get a doctor to talk to us as well, because the effects of long COVID and possibly multiple diagnoses of COVID, what are the effects of that, especially for someone, and by the way, I know he hasn't had multiple diagnoses, but he's now tested positive for COVID. He's 79 years old. So what does that mean for his life going forward if, in fact, he develops any kind of long COVID symptoms. And then you got to think about this is a president who's been traveling a lot, right? In the lead up to the midterm elections, we're looking at his approval rating. I believe the latest approval numbers are out. They're pretty low. He's at 31% in one of the polls that I saw just this morning, right? And who he came in contact with during these travels. Just the other day, we're looking at the governor of Rhode Island, the mayor of Warwick, Rhode Island, upon his visit there, Senator Markey, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Representative Bill Keating. I mean, these are a lot of folks that he's been coming into contact with over the last couple of days, and that's why it's not necessarily surprising, his diagnosis. But then you got a lot of folks that are likely worried about what this means for them going forward because, of course, of the implications of long COVID.
Yeah, and think about the fact that now we have 2 U.S. presidents in a row that have tested positive with COVID. And I think what we're going to see here is likely a different sort of approach to it. Let's remember his predecessor took off his mask, even though it was sort of in the period where he could have possibly infected other people. He didn't want to talk about
Also, some interesting moments earlier in the week, and this is just, it could be pure coincidence, that Monday and Tuesday he didn't hold any public events. And there were some questions as to what was he doing behind the scenes. The White House said he was still hard at work, holding a lot of meetings. Obviously, the president felt well enough to travel just yesterday. So we're looking to see of whether or not the schedule was already changed once because of any potential early sign of those symptoms. But the White House simply saying that the president has very mild symptoms right now. They also point to his vaccination status as well as his boosting status. They want to make it clear that they believe those people that have the vaccines, that they are going to be okay. This is a message we've heard from the White House before, even when those numbers of COVID cases went up earlier, Bill.
Just one question for me, Mark. What you're saying is that there was not a daily protocol for him getting a test. And what you're saying is that that did not change even with the travel overseas.
Well, he was tested before he went overseas. We know that. But in terms of what was happening in the last, say, a month ago, he wasn't getting tested on a daily basis. Because, again, reporters, we would ask, when was the last time the president got tested? And the White House would have to get back to us and say, oh, let me check and get back to you. Whereas if it was a daily basis, they'd say he was checked every day.
I think you can start to track down the timeline here. I mean, the last statement in the White House press release here is that the president's last previous test for COVID was Tuesday when he had a negative test result. He was obviously traveling and delivering that speech yesterday afternoon. So sometime between yesterday afternoon when he flew back to Washington and now was the positive test. So this could be the very beginning stages of his positivity. And by the way, according to what they say he's going to do, work in isolation till he tests negative, that goes way above and beyond, even as the White House statement notes, CDC protocol as it is today.
Well, luckily the White House is a big place, so he's going to have plenty of room to spread out. In fact, I was just looking to see, I don't see a Marine at the West Wing door right now, so an indication that the president would be in the residence at this moment. He did get back yesterday afternoon. I know he spoke to some reporters after he got Air Force One, and then he was back at the White House, I want to say around 6 p.m., 5 p.m. yesterday, so he got back at a fairly decent hour. But Sandra, you are asking about another really important point here is going to be the contact tracing, because this is also really interesting. Let's say, just heaven forbid, if I were to test positive when I came to the White House, they would ask me, when was the last time that I saw the president? So that would be something that would come up. The White House medical office would try to signal when anybody who has been COVID positive came into contact with the president or a high-level official. So they wanted to work backwards. And in this case, obviously, they're going to try to do a little bit of contact tracing to find out whether this came from somebody in senior staff, somebody he maybe met with and who's in Massachusetts. I know there was members of the Massachusetts congressional delegation with the president yesterday. I believe it was Senator Markey and Senator Warren were also traveling with him. We'll have to wonder if they have to isolate now. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on how the White House may react to this. But there's been so many questions about what this would mean for President Biden, given his age. And obviously, right now, the White House saying that he's experiencing mild symptoms and they're going to continue to monitor, but that the president is still working from here.
Mark, thank you, Mark. Stand by a moment here. We got some doctors coming up to our audience at home, so be patient with us. They'll be on in a few minutes. I know you're not a doctor. I wish you were, because I got a question about the medical protocol for something like this. I want to bring in Brett Berrigan on this. There will be a briefing Thursday afternoon, we're told. And Ashish Jha, the doctor who's in charge of the COVID-19 response coordinator of the White House, he will be there. He was with Harvard, he went to Brown, and now he's at the White House. He was a great source of information for us during the early days of the pandemic. Brett, I wonder, and the doctors can answer this for us in a minute here, given his age, given the vulnerability when you're fist bumping or shaking hands or breathing the same air of others overseas in rooms where you're not sure whether or not they have the virus. whether they could be infected or not, whether they were tested or not. It would seem that, given the stakes, how high they are, that a daily test would be reasonable, in my view.
Right. And listen, the president is in that age, that is in the vulnerable age group. He is, according to the statement, taking Paxlovid, which is a oral antiviral pill created by Pfizer. It is designed to treat COVID-19 in the early days. If you test positive, you take this pill, 3 pills twice a day for 5 days. And it is, according to the tests that they've done on it, 89% effective of keeping people out of the hospital or getting very sick. Add to that the president's been twice vaccinated and twice boosted. He's got a lot of vaccination, and now the Paxlovid as well. We didn't hear a lot about the antivirals in the fighting of COVID, but now a lot of experts, and you'll talk to these doctors, think that this is a game changer, and may be for the president if he's only experiencing mild symptoms.
All right, Brett, if you could stand by on the breaking news, we want to bring in Dr. Jerome Adams, the former U.S. Surgeon General. We're breaking this news right now, and I'm looking back at a flashback to the press secretary at the White House when she was asked multiple times the testing regimen for the president. The White House is saying he was last tested negative on Tuesday, so sometime in the last 48 hours he did test positive. But your reaction right now, and of course how the White House would be handling this situation?
Well, one of the things I want to say to folks is that, first of all, my thoughts and prayers go out to the president. I'm praying for him no matter whether you like him or not. He's the leader of our country, and we want him to be safe just as we wanted President Trump to be safe back when he was diagnosed. Also, I want people to understand that the White House medical unit is going to be in charge of his care. And that's an important distinction, because when people asked me questions back when President Trump was diagnosed, I had to constantly explain to them that the White House medical unit handled his.
She'll scour shorelines for the predators in an effort to keep beachgoers safe. This morning, more shark sightings.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Savannah Guthrie.
Good morning, everybody. We are coming on the breaking news out of the White House. The president has tested positive for COVID-19. That, according to a statement from the White House released just moments ago. The White House saying that the president is experiencing mild symptoms and has started taking an antiviral medication called Paxlovid. Is continuing to work isolated at the White House. He is fully vaccinated and has received 2 booster shots, the most recent in March. I want to turn to White House correspondent Peter Alexander for an update. So the president has had some recent travel. I know he tested negative on Tuesday, 2 days ago. Now he has tested positive. Fill us in.
Yeah, Savannah, that's exactly right. We just received that official word from the press secretary here at the White House that the president tested positive for COVID-19 this morning. We should note, and we're just now learning, that the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, tested negative this morning. She is traveling in Detroit right now. But as for the president, we've learned, according to the White House, and I want to go through their notes they were just receiving, that consistent with CDC guidelines, they say the president will isolate here at the White House. He'll continue to carry out all of his duties, they say, during that time. They say that he has been in contact with members of the White House staff by phone this morning and will participate in his planned meetings at the White House this morning via phone and Zoom for the from the residents. So that's the best information that we are getting specifically about his plans going forward. But obviously this is a significant headline. The 79-year-old president, the oldest president ever elected to office, now for the first time testing positive for COVID. Just yesterday, he was traveling. He was in Massachusetts, was scheduled to travel to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania today for a separate event. Clearly, that's not going to take place as a function of his requirements by protocol to isolate. So the questions become, how will this impact his schedule? How will his health be going forward? Obviously, we've been paying close attention to his health over the course of the last year and a half. Frankly, for the last 2.5 years almost since the pandemic began, where he had been very cautious, and the president's aides had been quite cautious in doing their best to make sure that he would steer clear of COVID. Routinely throughout the course of this presidency, Savannah, as you know, those people who would be meeting with the president would be required to wear masks, but also, and this includes staff and other world leaders, they'd be required to test before they were around the president in close proximity with him or to him for any period of time. I was traveling overseas with the president just last week when he was in Israel, he was in the West Bank, he was in Saudi Arabia as well, where we don't know the specifics on his testing cadence there, though he last tested negative earlier this week. But certainly there were a lot of precautions taken during those visits as well. But obviously, during the course of travel, the potential also exists that the president could be among others who may have had this virus. So at this time, it remains unclear exactly where he would have got it. But most notably, the White House says, to use their words, he is, quote, dealing with very mild symptoms, as they describe it, in an effort, Savannah, obviously, to try to downplay the seriousness of his health condition at this time. But we're going to have to ask further questions, and we'll pay a close attention to how he does in the days ahead.
Yeah, importantly, there is now Paxlovid, which is one of the therapeutic medicines that is prescribed in the early days of a positive COVID diagnosis. So the president is on that. There are also monoclonal antibodies, which can be given in a situation like this. Does not sound like that has happened so far. Not only is it a question of where he may have gotten it, and this subvariant of Omicron is extremely contagious, so it's really difficult to say. But the White House statement also mentioned reaching out to the close contacts of the president, those he had been around in the last few days. What has that schedule been like? You mentioned the overseas travel. He came back early this week. You know, the president is constantly meeting with lawmakers and dignitaries and officials. So how do you see that playing out in terms of the close contacts and those in the president's circle?
Well, he certainly has had a series of events. Yesterday, the most notable one that was the public visit that he made to Massachusetts, where he was there with members of his staff and some other lawmakers, Elizabeth Warren, Senator Markey. They were among those who were in attendance for his remarks there in Massachusetts. But I want to go through some of the other detail that we're getting, and the White House is communicating how it's going to keep the American people up to date on the situation as it relates to the president. They say out of an abundance of transparency, the White House will provide a daily update on the president's status as he continues to carry out the fullest duties of the office while in isolation. Per the standard protocol for any positive case, the White House medical unit is, as you note, informing all the close contacts, including members of Congress, though they don't detail who those may be, and any members of the press who interacted with the president during yesterday's travel. The president's last previous test, Savannah, as we just reported, was on Tuesday when his test result was negative. He was at church when he got back from overseas on Sunday. Very briefly, we did see him again publicly, as I noted yesterday, but his public appearances have been quite limited. So for now, we only have sort of a limited view of specifically who he would have been around in the course of the last couple days, the last 48 hours, where he may have been in a position to infect others around him. But certainly those are going to be questions that we're going to be asking here at the White House.
Yeah, and you started to touch on this, Peter, but it's worth repeating and getting into the specifics of it, because the president, any president, is well protected. A president who's 79 years old in the face of a COVID pandemic, certainly all the more so. And there are protocols that he has been observing since he came into office about who can have contact with the president and what you have to establish to become in close contact with the president. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the White House has been very strict in these protocols, and frankly, for the course of the time that since his presidency began, in order to be in what we describe as the press pool, that immediate group of reporters who would interact with the president in some close space, you would have to test negative that day, which is to say, if you were being invited into the Oval Office, you would have had to have a negative test before you spent any time around the president. And that wasn't unique to the press, Savannah. That applied to the members of Congress, to the world leaders, and to the members of the president's own staff, who we would routinely see wearing different neon bracelets, those sort of, those stick-em bracelets that we've been wearing so often as part of this procedure over the course of the last couple of years that would indicate that they were negative as you walked around campus. And if you were positive, you not only were not allowed on campus, but would have to test negative multiple times before your return after at least a period of, I believe it was 10 days. I tested positive a while back, and those restrictions were certainly applied to me as they are applied to everybody else. So the effort was to make sure that anybody who came into proximity with the president had to have those tests. There were obviously large events, big gatherings on the South Lawn. Not every individual who would gather for that would need to be tested, but certainly for events that happen behind closed doors in the Roosevelt Room, in the Situation Room, or in the Oval Office, those individuals would have been tested. And it also applied to those individuals most often who would be in the first rows, in the front rows of some of the public events that the president would be holding here at the White House, Savannah. Again, all of it an effort to try to keep the president as safe as possible. For those who are just joining us now, though, we do want to repeat the major headline, which is just this morning, the White House is saying that President Biden now for the first time has tested positive for COVID-19. He has been fully vaccinated, twice boosted. Savannah, as you note, now has begun that course of Paxlovid, the antiviral course. It's a 5-day course. You take a couple of pills in the morning, a couple pills at night. And as the White House describes it right now, he is dealing with what they call, quote, very mild symptoms. Savannah.
Let's turn to Dr. Kavita Patel to walk us through someone in this scenario, 79 years old, fully vaccinated, twice boosted, this COVID variant, the subvariant. What's your take on the president's positive diagnosis and the Paxlovid that is now being administered?
Yeah, Savannah, 2 points of interest. We know that it's highly likely he's been infected with the BA.5 variant. That's that incredibly infectious variant that's dominating in the United States. Second, there's updated data to show that Paxlovid still works against BA.5, but much less than it does against the other variants. So I think taking all of that into consideration, this is the best course of treatment for someone, not just of his age, but as you mentioned, boosted. I will just say as a side note, most patients with Paxlovid do very well, but there is that report of rebound. Remember, Dr. Fauci had it, where he started Paxlovid, finished his course, and then had symptoms improve, and then actually return. So it's incredibly important.
Doctor, what is, when you're a physician treating here, what is the decision when you're looking at, should we do the Paxlovid, which is the therapeutic, the pill that you take, versus the monoclonal antibodies? Are they not as effective against BA.5? How does that decision-making process play out?
Right. You are spot on. The monoclonal antibodies, we used to have a huge kind of panoply of monoclonals we could choose from. The truth is that against BA.5, we really only have one that we can use for treatment. And it also has been reduced in terms of its ability to prevent people from having hospitalizations and deaths. So Paxlovid, for a lot of reasons, including what Peter walked through, you take it twice a day. It's a 5-day course, and then you're done. Much easier unless you have any contraindications. There's some patients that can't take Paxlovid. The president doesn't have any of those. So it is a more obvious choice, especially if you are overall healthy, vaccinated, plus boosted ×2. I am really glad he got that second booster, though, Savannah. It could make all the difference.
Hold there, Dr. Patel. I want to keep the conversation going, but we've just heard from Dr. Jill Biden, who, by the way, the White House reports has tested negative. She's on travel in Detroit and just spoke to reporters, I believe. Let's play it.
My husband tested positive for COVID. I talked to him just a few minutes ago. He's doing fine. He's feeling good. I tested negative this morning. I am going to keep my schedule. I am, according to CDC guidelines, I am keeping masks. And so I'd like to go in and see the program here. Learning loss as an educator means a lot to me. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for coming over to town. How are you doing? You must be concerned.
Fine. Thank you.
Dr. Jill Biden, who is got an event in Detroit today, addressing the reporters on the news that her husband, President Biden, has tested positive for COVID. She, as just mentioned, tested negative this morning. That's a live picture. She's now inside that event carrying on, but according to CDC guidelines, because she is a close contact, wearing that mask. So we'll continue to watch those pictures. I want to turn to Dr. Patel just on this issue of the BA.5 variant. I think we're assuming that this is the variant that he has. There's no, I don't think any way for us to know right now. But we have noted that when you go back to the March 2020 version of COVID, as we've come along, there's just been a general trend, I think you'd agree, of the virus becoming more contagious, but hopefully less virulent. Is that the case with BA.5?
Yeah, that's the case so far. The data supports that even though this is the most infectious version of COVID we've seen, that it is not more severe. Now, I caveat that, though, Savannah, because that doesn't mean that people all just do fine. In fact, we're seeing people who have been boosted and are hospitalized, especially if they are over the age of 60, which is why it's critical that President Biden receive not just that immediate treatment, but that he will obviously have ongoing monitoring. I have no doubt they will do genetic sequencing to see which variant he has. And if necessary, we do have other things that we can offer him. Luckily, he's feeling fine, relatively speaking, not in the hospital. But we do now finally have some of these treatments to offer. But BA5, I think it's just another highlight that it's incredibly serious and real, and people need to take any symptoms they have seriously, get tested and get treated.
And Dr. Patel, I mean, we just heard our White House correspondent Peter Alexander walking through some of the protocols that are in effect at the White House, and it really speaks to the fact that BA5 is so contagious because according to White House protocol, you really can't get near the president without a negative test, but there are breakthrough infections and no system is perfect.
Yeah, and not only that, Savannah, I tell people, I remind people, a negative test just gives you that moment in time. You can have a negative test, and obviously this is what happened. The president probably had nothing but, negative tests surrounding him on his foreign trip, domestically, but obviously someone can turn positive without even realizing it.
Regret what you did in calling police on him?
No, I don't regret it, because I believe I...
This is an ABC News special report.
And hello, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We are coming on the air with breaking news as we have just learned that the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has tested positive for COVID. He is vaccinated. He has had 2 boosters, but as we've been talking about for a couple weeks now, the spread of COVID taking off across the country, numerous states reporting a rise in COVID cases. And now we are learning the President of the United States has tested positive for COVID-19. We just received this statement from the White House. And this is what I can tell you so far, that he is experiencing very mild symptoms, according to the White House. He has been isolated. He does plan to continue to carry out all his duties fully at this time. He has been in contact with members of the White House staff by phone this morning. He has been making calls to those that he traveled with this week, specifically when he gave his speech on climate change. He had various aides with him. His press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, of course, was with him. In addition to his deputy chief of staff, Bruce Reed, also Gina McCarthy, National Climate Advisor. They have been notified that he has tested positive. Do not have word yet on the First Lady and where that stands, but we can tell you he is also taking the antiviral Paxlovid. This has proven to be very effective when you have taken this antiviral, when you find out that you have tested positive. So he is taking that. We are told that he does plan to participate in all planned meetings and work in isolation there at the White House. Dr. Jen Ashton joining me now as we receive this news that the President of the United States has tested positive for COVID-19. So, Jen, really no surprise. I mean, we have been talking now for a couple weeks on how COVID has been spreading, and for a number of years, a number of us have been lucky that we haven't tested positive, but now have, and now the president testing positive for COVID.
Right, Kara. And to be honest, so many people, just when you talk about President Biden, are surprised that he's been able to avoid this for so long. But we have to look at his medical condition and who he is, and then what we know about this virus and how COVID behaves. As we know, he is 79 years old. His last presidential physical evaluation was done in November of 2021. He got very high marks from his personal physician, but we do know that he has some basic medical conditions, atrial fibrillation, some high cholesterol, some gastrointestinal reflux. None of those really put someone at particularly high risk, but his highest risk factor, Kira, is his age. And so that is why, as you mentioned, no surprise that he's being treated with the antiviral pill Paxlovid. It's been shown in clinical trials to be 89% effective in reducing the risk of severe COVID-19 illness, meaning hospitalization or death. But I want to be crystal clear, he is going to be closely monitored at the White House by the personal physician of the president, and if anything looks like it is going in the wrong direction, I absolutely expect that he would be hospitalized. If nothing else, then for more close observation. But remember, the White House is not like your home or my home. They can do a lot of medical monitoring and observation and testing right there at the White House.
Sure, and we saw that with former President Donald Trump immediately, and the medical response there. And now, considering the president's age and his underlying conditions, no doubt he will be monitored minute by minute. And he says he's going to continue on with his daily duties. Jen, just for a moment, can we talk about the antiviral? Because, you know, we have reported here on ABC that there have been a number of people that have taken this antiviral Paxlovid, and it's been very successful in helping with symptoms, severity, with regard to respiratory issues. But there have been a number of cases where it has not worked well, and the COVID has come back quickly.
Well, Kara, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is something that so many people have questions about. We have reported here before that there seems to be this Paxlovid rebound. Published clinical reports seem to indicate that that rate hovers in the single-digit percentage, you know, around 4 or 5%, maybe higher. But I want to be crystal clear. When you make a decision in medicine, clinical judgment, you're evaluating risk versus benefit. And in this case, it's really 4 questions. It's risk of taking Paxlovid versus the risk of not taking Paxlovid, and then the benefits of Paxlovid versus the benefits of not taking Paxlovid. And right now, that last question, the benefits of not treating with this antiviral medication, really are 0. You know, what would be the worst case scenario if President Biden took Paxlovid and got this so-called rebound phenomenon? Just more time being in isolation. The benefits are clear based on the clinical trials of what this drug can do in terms of reducing the risk of hospitalization and death. And that's why it is a straightforward and easy clinical decision to make to give him that medication.
Dr. Jen Ashton, please stay with me. I want to bring in Chief Washington Correspondent Jonathan Karl now. John, I guess first let's start with, are you getting any other word from the White House or your sources, in addition to the statement we just received from the White House that the president has tested positive for COVID?
The point the White House is emphasizing is that his symptoms are very mild. Of course, this is a person who has been vaccinated. He has been boosted. He has been boosted again, and he's on Paxlovid, which, as Dr. Jen pointed out, is something that has worked quite well, including for people close to him who have tested positive in the recent past. He plans to continue to do his work through Zoom meetings. This is an entirely different situation than what we saw when the previous president tested positive for COVID. Of course, President Trump tested positive when there was no vaccine, and his condition was incredibly serious and had to be essentially medevaced to Walter Reed. That is not the case here. You know, I have to say the other thing, Kira, is it is remarkable, and you alluded to this, that he had not tested positive earlier. When you think about the people around him who have tested positive, his press secretary, his vice president, his COVID expert, Tony Fauci, tested positive and is now recovered. So what they're emphasizing is, you know, he's getting the best treatment. He'll go through the process. They expect you know, obviously a full recovery.
So let's talk about individuals that he may have possibly exposed. He did test negative on Tuesday, but prior to that, he made that big trip to the Middle East. So what do we know about his travels, his testing? Was he being tested every single day? Could this possibly have happened while he was overseas? We know it takes a while.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Tony DeCopel in New York, and we bring you breaking news from the White House, where President Joe Biden has tested positive for COVID-19. We are told that the president is experiencing mild symptoms, and he is positive after a negative test Tuesday. And despite being fully vaccinated and twice boosted, he got that second booster shot on March 30th. For more on what we know at this hour about the president's condition, how he may have contracted it, let's go to the White House and Caitlin Huey-Burns, who is standing by for us. Caitlin, good morning. They're saying mild conditions that we have in the statement from the White House. Do we know anything more?
Hi, good morning, Tony. Yes, mild symptoms is how the White House is describing it. They mentioned that he was last tested for COVID-19 on Tuesday and tested negative at that point. We are also learning that the First Lady tested this morning, and she has tested negative. She is heading to Detroit. The president was expected to go to Pennsylvania today for a campaign, for an event to talk about gun proposals and fighting crime. He was also supposed to have a fundraiser later this evening. We are told that the president is now in isolation according to CDC protocols, and he is going to continue to be in isolation until he tests negative. They are also working on contact tracing, so talking to everybody with whom the president was in close contact. That means staffers, that means members of the press. Remember, he was just on a trip abroad. He just returned from Saudi Arabia on Sunday morning. So contact tracing will be going on, but they say these symptoms are mild, that he will continue in isolation until he comes with a negative test. Tony.
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. Also joining us is Dr. Celine Gounder. She's an epidemiologist and CBS News contributor. Dr. Gounder, the president, as we said, is fully vaccinated. He's been twice boosted. Symptoms are, in fact, not just mild, but very mild, according to the White House, and he's begun to take Paxlovid. However, he's 79 years old. That is a risk factor. What should people know or think about the president's condition?
I think it's very reassuring that, one, he's been double vaccinated and double boosted. He is a healthy 79-year-old with no, to my knowledge, chronic medical conditions. So chronic medical conditions would include diabetes. He's clearly not obese. Those are the kinds of things that really put you at risk for severe disease. He also has started Paxlovid, which we know further reduces the risk of hospitalization. And of course, he would have access to monoclonal antibodies should his condition deteriorate in any way.
We have the president's health report from the White House doctor from 2021. He does not use any tobacco products, according to that, does not drink alcohol, works out at least 5 days a week. So given the background that's been made public about this particular patient, patient number one in this country inside the White House, how long might the president be in isolation out of a normal working situation?
We're seeing people with this Omicron subvariant, the BA.5 subvariant, takes about 10 days on average. You know, everyone's a little bit different. Some people will be a little bit shorter, some people a little bit longer. But 10 days is really the average for people to recover and become test negative.
All right, Dr. Celine Gounder with some context and background on the coronavirus and this particular patient, what we know publicly. If you're just joining us, we came on the air to let you know that President Joe Biden, according to the White House, has tested positive for COVID-19. He is taking Paxlovid at this time and is experiencing what the White House describes as, quote, very mild symptoms. We will, of course, be following it, and there will be more to come on your local news on this CBS station. Also tonight on the CBS Evening News. Many of you will now return to CBS Mornings. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Tony DeCopel, CBS News, New York.
Serious side effects including sleepiness. Don't drive, operate heavy machinery, or do other dangerous activities until you know how Ingrezza affects you.
Story. Get the most accurate Storm Tracker 2 forecast on Up with KREM.
Welcome back to CBS Mornings, and good morning to our viewers on the West Coast. We are live right now in New York because we have breaking news out of Washington. The White House has announced just a short time ago that President Joe Biden has tested positive for the coronavirus. He was negative on Tuesday, traveling, working on Wednesday. He's positive as of this morning. Caitlin Huey-Burns is at the White House for us, where the president is isolating for now, we're told, according to a statement from the White House. Caitlin, good morning. What do we know about the president's condition?
Good morning, Tony. Well, the White House is describing this as, quote, very mild symptoms. They say that he is taking the medication Paxlovid and that he is continuing to work here in the White House while in isolation. They say that he is going to be talking to people on the phone, using Zoom, so they are adamant that he is continuing the duties and continuing to work while in isolation. They also say that he is going to remain in isolation until he tests negative. Now, the last time he tested was on Tuesday, and he tested negative then, and of course now has this positive test. Remember that he just returned from a trip abroad to Saudi Arabia on Sunday. So the White House is now doing contact tracing, being in communication with everybody that he was talking to on that trip. Also communicating with all the White House staffers and members of the press who were with him and who have been with him over the past couple of days, as well as members of Congress who have been with him this week. He was expected later today, of course, to travel to Pennsylvania to talk about gun reform and ways to combat crime, and was also slated to have a fundraiser in Philadelphia. We have also been hearing from Dr. Jha, who of course is the White House Coronavirus Task Force Director, and he says that that the president has started to take Paxlovid. He says he describes the president's symptoms as, quote, tired, runny nose, dry cough. He went to bed feeling fine but didn't sleep well, and then took a positive test this morning.
Yeah, Caitlin, I have a letter here from the physician to the president, the White House doctor, that's Kevin O'Connor, reiterating what Dr. Jha was saying there. Runny nose, fatigue, dry cough, started yesterday evening, apparently. The president is fully vaccinated. He is twice boosted. He also, according to his medical history there from the White House, does not use any tobacco products, does not drink alcohol, works out 5 days a week, is 5'11", 184 pounds, so he's a healthy white male. That's how they describe him. 79 years old is why there's a little hint of worry in this conversation, but so far, positive, very mild symptoms. Caitlin, thank you very much. We know you'll keep us posted if things change. Right now, we want to go back to our regular programming, and we're going to be joining it mid-program. Don't know where we're going to be, but we're talking with epidemiologist Dr. Celine Gounder about some of your questions, viewer questions, about COVID as it happens, and the BA.5 subvariant in particular.
Epidemiologist and our contributor from KFF's Kaiser Health News, where she's editor-at-large. Good morning to you, Dr. Celine Gounder. Good to have you here. You know, the thing about people testing at home, the number has to be higher, because I could see people taking the test and say, I'm going to keep this to myself, this positive diagnosis. Don't you think?
Good. Thank you, Dr. Celine Gounder. Appreciate it. All right, shifting gears, are you thinking about booking a last-minute summer vacation? People have been posting their rental horror stories on social media. So ahead, we'll tell you what the warning signs are, the ones you should look for. But first, it is 8:07. Time to check your local weather.
It's just a chance to say, hey, get out right now. It's the end of you and me. It's too late now. I can't wait for you to be gone. 'Cause I know about her, and I wonder how I brought all the lies. You said that you would treat me right, but you was just a waste of time.
A lot of folks ask me why their dishwasher doesn't get everything clean. I tell them,
Last thing here, the symptoms started yesterday, so that was Wednesday. Did not anticipate that breaking news. Great to be with you. Harris is going to continue our coverage right now. Here's the Faulkner Focus.
Thank you, Bill and Sandra. Breaking news on the President of the United States. Our continuing coverage. President Biden has tested positive for COVID. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. The White House has said that he is experiencing what they are calling mild symptoms. He's now in isolation. The president has referenced his health during his recent visit to Jerusalem. In his own words, let's watch.
I was making a speech, and I had a terrible headache. Excuse me, a terrible headache. And so followed wrong. I had a terrible headache. This is years ago, and I did a very stupid thing.
So again, the president's struggling a bit there. We do know the White House doctors, the White House has announced that they do not believe his symptoms from COVID began before yesterday. That was last Friday, what we showed you, just for perspective. And yesterday, he traveled to Massachusetts, where he announced executive action on climate change. Jackie Heinrich is live for us at the White House. And Jackie, it's all of that recent travel, all of that recent exposure, and also questions about who got exposed to him now that the White House hopefully can answer questions when they talk with the nation live from the White House press briefing room coming up a bit later. Jackie.
Yeah, that's right, Harris. We're going to hear from the press secretary and also Dr. Ashish Jha later on this afternoon. We were not initially slated to have any sort of briefing today because, as you mentioned, the president was slated to go to Pennsylvania to talk about crime and guns. That, of course, now is not happening, and we will be hearing more later on. But we don't know where the president picked this up. It could have been anywhere. As you know, he just got back from a trip to Saudi Arabia and Israel on Sunday. He went to Massachusetts yesterday, where he was talking about climate. And his plans today to go to Pennsylvania have been scrapped. He was also going to spend the weekend at his Delaware home and then travel to Florida on Monday to talk to, I think it was the Black Law Enforcement Officers group, and then also a DNC rally. So all of those plans are scrapped. We do know, though, that the president went to bed last night after his travel to Massachusetts feeling just fine, but he didn't sleep well, and apparently he woke up this morning with some mild symptoms. He was tired, he had a runny nose and a dry cough, and tested positive this morning. He is fully vaccinated. He has been boosted.
And free lollipop with that free
Oh,
shot.
we did the same thing. We also got a free car for my 4-year-old, but it's all worth it. Second shot. It's exciting days for those of us with kids under 5.
Feels like freedom around the corner. Jen, thanks for jumping on for us. As always,
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. Good to talk to you. So if you're just joining us, everybody, it is the top of the hour. Welcome. I'm Yasmin Vasugan. You're watching MSNBC. We're following some breaking news out of Washington, D.C. We are now getting in, as we've been following the story for the last 45 minutes or so. The president, in fact, is now tested positive for COVID-19. He has been boosted twice. The last booster he received was, in fact, on March 30th. We are being told he is experiencing mild symptoms. He's doing quite well, as we heard from the First Lady, who spoke to her husband a little bit earlier on today. He's currently getting treatment with Paxlovid, as we hear that, and that is to reduce the likelihood that, in fact, he would be hospitalized or have more severe symptoms from COVID. The First Lady has tested negative as well. The Vice President has been informed of the President's positive test as well. So we're following this breaking news story out of Washington, and, of course, the fallout from all of this, because the President has an incredibly busy schedule ahead and how he's going to deal with all of that. With that, I want to bring in Mike Memley once again, who's been standing by for us and following exactly what's happening inside the White House right now as the President continues to isolate. We're being told as well, Mike, the President will, in fact, isolate until, they're being quite conservative about this, it seems, until he tests negative. If you know differently than me, let me know. What else are you hearing?
No, that is, in fact, Yasmin, the White House protocols for just this scenario, whether you're the President of the United States or whether you're a junior White House staffer. But we just got some brand new information in the form of a memo from Dr. Kevin O'Connor. I mentioned him earlier. He is the President's chief physician. And this is the first full summary of the President's health. And I'll read you from that letter. Dr. O'Connor writing that this morning, as part of our routine screening program for the President, he was, through an antigen test, tested positive. This result was subsequently confirmed by PCR testing. Dr. O'Connor continues that he, on questioning President Biden, is currently experiencing mild symptoms, runny nose, fatigue with an occasional dry cough, which started yesterday evening. He meets FDA criteria for Paxlovid, so Dr. O'Connor writes, I recommended initiating such treatment. Dr. O'Connor also notes that the President is fully vaccinated and twice boosted, so I anticipate that he will respond favorably. Early use of Paxlovid in this case provides additional protection against severe disease. And as you just mentioned, Dr. O'Connor also saying he will isolate in accordance with CDC recommendations and that he would keep the White House updated as it continues. We expect Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, to hold a briefing this afternoon at the White House in which we can expect further updates. It is worth noting, I should note, that Karine Jean-Pierre was among those traveling with President Biden yesterday. She was both on Air Force One, of course, with the president, but also in even closer quarters aboard Marine One with the president. She was wearing a mask when I saw her getting off Marine One last night. But, you know, there has been something of a running joke around the press corps, around the White House even, that as so many individuals in the administration, among staff, have been testing positive for COVID-19, the White House has almost routinely said that the president was not a close contact. So now this question of who is a close contact of the president, given this diagnosis, is one that we're going to be also asking officials about more and more, because those officials, as you would expect now, would be subject to the protocols when somebody does test positive, who they are considered to be a close contact for. The First Lady, her office already indicating that she is now, as a close contact following CDC guidance in that regard, she'll be masking as well. And so this is going to be something worth tracking going forward. Yasmin, just to step back and put this obviously in the context of where this president is at this moment. Obviously, we've been talking so much about lately the speculation about his political future and the concerns about his age. He turns 80 this year. The White House has been saying for weeks now that this is something that they acknowledge is going to be something talked about in the context of his political future, that there is nothing, as one White House official put it to me, short of a time machine that we can do to deal with the president's age. But this is something, as that official said, you can only show. And discussions are happening behind closed doors right now among White House officials about the best path forward, including potentially the means by which President Biden might be able to speak to the country, or at least address the country, whether it's in a form of a tape video or not. It's worth noting, of course, not just the First Lady is traveling outside Washington today, we've heard from her, but also Vice President Harris, who was actually aboard Air Force Two when the news of the president's diagnosis first broke. When she just landed in Charlotte a few moments ago, she didn't address reporters, but a spokesperson for the vice president releasing a tweet in which she says that the vice president's schedule today with an event in North Carolina will continue as planned. And in fact, we expect her to, when she speaks at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon, to address the fact of the president's diagnosis today. The vice president has spoken by phone with President Biden today. They were last together, according to the vice president's office, on Tuesday. No word on whether she is considered a close contact at this point. And in terms of transparency, it's also worth noting the White House Twitter account just now has posted the letter from the president's doctor, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, that I was reading from earlier today. So this is an indication of the kind of transparency they're trying to show, but also I think the attitude the White House is trying to convey at this point, that they are not concerned, that yes, this is a matter of importance, but they are going to be transparent. And I'm reminded of, in fact, of a moment during the 2020 campaign when I was covering then candidate Biden. The day that President Trump was diagnosed with COVID, the then candidate Biden went ahead with his schedule. He tested and tested negative back home in Wilmington, traveled as planned to Michigan to try to carry the keep calm and carry on message that they're now doing in the White House.
Yeah, and it seems as if that exact same message is being sent to the country right now amidst the president's diagnosis of COVID. Mike Memoli, thank you. Yamiche Alcindor, thank you. Ashish Shah, no, we didn't have Ashish Shah on, excuse me. That would have been good, though. Dr. Peter Hotez, thank you. Dr. Vin Gupta, my entire panelists, all my panelists that have been joining me over the last couple of hours, I appreciate you joining me throughout this breaking news. Again, the president testing positive for COVID. However, we're learning he's experiencing mild symptoms at the moment. We're going to continue to follow this breaking news story from here. For now, that wraps it up for me. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. Chris Chancing picks up coverage with more breaking news after a very short break.
A lot of people need to replace their windows or patio doors, but they put it off because they think it'll be too expensive.